Good evening, everybody. I'm Haley Mitchell-Haugen. I'm the editor of Sheila-Na-Gig Online and Sheila-Na-Gig Editions. And tonight we are gathering to celebrate the chapbook called What the Angel Saw and What the Saint Refused by the fabulous George Franklin, coming to us from Miami, Florida. Jane Ann Fuller writes of his work, "You will be astonished at what a narrative poem can achieve when you read George Franklin's groundbreaking collection, What the Angel Saw, What the Saint Refused." And I think you will agree with her assessment when you hear this work. George Franklin is the winner of the 2023 Yates Poetry Prize. His book, Remote Cities, is the third full-length poetry collection with Sheila-Na-Gig Editions, complementing Noise of the World and Traveling for No Good Reason, which won Sheila-Na-Gig Editions manuscript competition in 2018. And George and I have been pretty good buddies since then. He has also authored the dual language collection Among the Ruins with Jimena Gomez, published by Katakana Editores in 2020. And the chapbook Travels of the Angel of Sorrow from Blue Cedar Press in 2020. He's co-translator along with Jimena Gomez of Last Day and co-author with Gomez of Conversations About Water, also from Katakana Editores in 2019 and 2023. George has been very busy, and he also practices law in Miami. So happy to have you here, George. Take it away for us.
Thank you, Haley. And thank everybody for coming. I really appreciate it. It's hard to introduce this book in a way because it's a little bit different from, most, I think, of the work that I've done. These are narrative poems that center around two main characters. One is the Angel of Sorrow, and the other is the Saint of Unbelievers. So in a way, you could be Team Angel or Team Saint or both. They're unusual characters. The angel really isn't a conventional angel, and the saint is very far from being a conventional saint. And I think you'll see that as it goes. The angel has no idea why he's here. He doesn't know what he's supposed to do, really. And the saint is trying to live without belief of any kind. And he's sort of martyrized by that in some ways. But he's also got a nasty sense of humor, and he enjoys doing things like tormenting shopkeepers and by cursing them and things of that sort. Okay, we'll start off with a couple of angel poems. Not for the first time. The Angel of Sorrow stares at a tank half buried in snow. The muzzle of its gun pointing down, ice crusting along the barrel. The hatch is open and the cabin empty. The angel can see tracks where soldiers ran into the forest, the steam from their breath lost behind black tree trunks. There is no traffic on the road, but there's a patch of ice, pink darkening to red. The angel notices that the sky is overcast, and evening has already shadowed the horizon in the east. Smoke rises in columns from the south. A city is burning. Even though he knows that he could spread his wings and be elsewhere, the angel stands still in the road. Later, he will walk down a street that follows the curves of a river. In underground shelters, children are awake, playing games on cell phones, while pigeons whose nests have been destroyed arc across the sky like missiles thrown off course. Air raid sirens divide the night into before and after, but the angel doesn't listen to them. From a footbridge, he watches the fast-moving water and sharp edges of floating ice. Uniforms caught on broken branches, explosions reflected in the current. The angel can change nothing. He is not here to bless or comfort, to join a war or stop one. If he hears cries, they are the same he heard at Béziers and Jerusalem, Vicksburg and Stalingrad. A cloud moves in front of the moon. It's better that no one sees him. Thank you. This one is sort of self-explanatory. The angel writes a letter. I have traveled so long, I do not remember the day I left or whether I was given instructions. Only that the planets turned below my wings, the gears of a great engine made of darkness, and the sunlight ricocheted off the moons of Jupiter, Venus's clouds, the blue seas and green moss of Earth. I know it's not usual for angels to write. What can we describe that you have not already seen, planned for, willed? Was it your will that sent me here to villages where fleas outnumber the humans and dogs, to cities where the cobblestones weep and brick walls no longer bear the weight of what they see? I am tired of watching civilizations give way, of firing squads and mass graves, of frostbitten fingers and tree trunks shattered by gunfire. I know the vinegar smell of taverns in the morning, the sickness of prisoners whose skin bleeds from their shackles and who are afraid to look at their jailers. How heavy are the swords of conquerors? How high the pyramid of skulls? How terrified their horses? Before, I shared your eternity, unchanging days, skies without weather. Here, days and nights spin in their own eternity. It makes me dizzy to watch them, to see the quick parade of birth and death, the occasional moment of understanding, the scent of pine sap, and the smoke of fireplaces. Is this what I was sent to see? How flesh ages and decays, how the mind, ephemeral as music, falters and forgets, how glaciers melt and slide into the ocean. In all that I have witnessed, I have understood so little. A boy lies in the street with a bullet hole in his forehead. His arm has fallen across another's face. Their blood pools together at the side of the road. I see each of them as they're born, eat dinner, learn to read. I remember their names and the names of their sisters and grandparents. I do not ask why I'm here or how much suffering weighs compared to a star or a mountain, but perhaps I've seen enough of it. Perhaps I've been changed by this place, my wings damp with these sorrows. As you know all things, I know this letter will reach you. I am in a village somewhere. There are mountains that are hard to cross in winter, and every night someone else dies from plague or cold. I sit in a small tavern, writing these words and drinking a pitcher of wine. I wait patiently for your reply. Thank you. Um, there's another character in here with the angel who shows up in one of the poems, the philosopher, and this poem puts them together. The philosopher and the angel. Even for the angel, finding the philosopher's house is not easy. Everyone assumes he lives in a lodge in the forest or an apartment near the university. In the cafes, waiters tell stories about how he will set up shop at a table in the back and spend hours in conversation with his students. For this reason, they believe he lives nearby, but no one knows which street or house. At the university, it's the same. Occasionally, he is seen on his way to class or coming back from class, and someone remembers that once every few weeks he stops by to pick up his salary. Others say he sends a student to get it, or a woman who might be his wife or his daughter. The angel learns that none of these stories is right. The philosopher lives in a small house, not far from the railroad tracks that run to the southeast. His father had been an engineer, and the son remembers the smell of diesel on his clothes at dinner and traveling with him once all the way to Berlin. The house looks much like others in the neighborhood. There is a garden, but no one has tended it in a long time. And when by accident it produces some tomatoes or beans, the crows and rabbits eat them before the garden's owner knows they exist. When the angel appeared at his door, what the philosopher could not understand was why the angel had gone to the trouble to find him. Everything I am, he said, I've put into my books. You of all beings know how brief our lives are and how much the same. I and my neighbor shop at the same grocery, buy the same cans of soup, and if sometimes I buy oranges or bananas from a country near the equator, or read a journal he'd find boring, it's of little consequence. We are more alike than different. The angel was seated on a worn sofa next to a cat that found neither philosopher nor angel worth a stare or twitch of her ears. The angel smiled at the cat and respectfully disagreed. If I spoke with your neighbor, he would be at pains to tell me how unusual he was, whether it was his taste in coffee or a disease that runs in his family. He'd be certain of this difference. You are not. It is my nature, the angel explained, to be drawn to grief and loss, to listen to the kind of story your neighbor will tell when memory fails and he thinks his dead sister has sent him on an errand. Your grief, though, is not the same as his. You have lost as much as he has, and you know how fragile your world is, the cruelty and stupidity it contains. How is it your grief is without despair? The philosopher poured tea for himself and the angel. Spinoza, he said, would have put it better than I can. His lungs were raw from the glass he ground to make a living. He was dying, even excommunicated, but he was not unhappy. You say you are drawn to loss. I am drawn to this house that needs to be painted, to rugs my mother took outside to clean, the dust flying off in all directions, and to my books on these shelves. Some I know I'll never open again. Some I will take down as soon as you've left. This is a life, such as it is, and I am satisfied with it. They finished their tea without speaking more. Okay, let's do some poems for Team Saint. A couple of other things about the saint. The closest thing to a friend that the saint has is a librarian in a neighboring town who is a free thinker. And they occasionally get together and have tea and talk. To believe in nothing. The saint of unbelievers knows it's not easy to believe in nothing. Humans are by nature trusting creatures. Perhaps it is their long infancy, the large hands of their parents, the reassuring heartbeats, the mother's bosom extended to their lips. Humans, he says, dwell in a past they're unable to put behind them. The saint, however, has noticed they do not fool themselves entirely. They know that if they fail to plant potatoes and grain, they will starve in the winter. If they do not take shelter, they will freeze in the cold mountain nights. They are smart enough not to test God too often. The saint, though, trusts nothing and believes in nothing. He provides for himself, but only as much as necessary. To amass wealth more than a sack of oats that has started to mold is to risk believing in wealth's protection. The same risk applies to a house or a barn. The hut where the saint lives is old, and there are gaps in the wood where the wind sings and ice forms on the wall. It is comforting for him when water drips from a rafter, but it's not the comfort of belief. It's only the momentary confirmation of fact, of a life that doesn't require his belief. Once he found the frozen carcass of a deer, a buck with antlers showing it had survived other winters. The saint salvaged what he could and left the rest for foxes and mice. But afterwards he was troubled. Is the knowledge of death itself a kind of belief? And this is one that Haley liked, and so I'm including it. It also got Jimena's vote. So that's how this one gets in. The Dust of Books. It's interesting. Poets always like poems that criticize poetry. Have you noticed that? Okay. All right. The Dust of Books. The saint of unbelievers does not read poetry. The librarian first tried to interest him in Rilke and Trakl, then Milosz, but he was unsuccessful. So many words, said the saint, and for what purpose? The librarian mounted a strong defense, replying that poetry broke through smug certainties, opened the reader to realities beyond changing flat tires and pressing the keys of a cash register. The saint shook his head. The librarian, he said, had spent too long at the university, breathing the dust of books, drinking coffee, and chewing on the stubs of pencils. Reality is the cow bellowing when the calf is twisted inside her, her blood mixed with straw on the ground, and the farmer's wife left to do the butchering, the farmer drunk in the pasture. Reality, he said, is a cough, a fever moving through a village or the cold slums of a city, confusion on the faces of the dying. The librarian struggled as he listened. He asked if there was nothing worth preserving, worth remembering. The saint shook his head no, and the librarian stared at an old stain on the floor, books waiting to be reshelved. The most words can do, said the saint, is remind us of the clouded eyes of rabbits sideways in the snow, or the cries of a shop girl crushed by the weight of her employer's belly, held by his arms, his hand over her mouth. Then they do have a purpose, answered the librarian. Such as it is, acknowledged the saint. The saint, incidentally, lives in this little village and outside this little village in the mountains. That's hard to get to. Blasphemy. The saint of unbelievers does not understand blasphemy. He also does not bother with blasphemy. Last spring, a visiting priest gave a sermon in the town square. He warned the villagers against licentious books and films, referring to them as blasphemous droppings from the bowels of Satan. The saint admired his language and decided to use the expression the next time he cursed a tradesman. However, he also thought it was a silly speech because the villagers rarely read books of any kind, and there was no audience that would make the screening of films profitable. The word blasphemy, though, was a different matter. To the saint, it suggested speech that was an affront to a deity or religion. He thought for a moment whether any speech could offend an unbeliever. He, for example, was not offended by the words of the priest. It was not clear to him either why the priest's church should be troubled by news stories that were not so different from stories of antiquity. This is not to say he cared about them at all, only that he had yet to find anything that offended him. In the fall, the priest returned. His audience was smaller because he came during the last days of harvest. This time the saint was also occupied, patching some, but not all, of the holes in his roof. In the afternoon, he walked into the village to see if someone was throwing away something useful. To his surprise, he heard the priest encourage his handful of listeners to search the villagers' homes, seeking out a comprehensive list of sinful books and devices, some of which even the saint had never heard of. He imagined the grocer and his wife, who were listening carefully, making use of these items, and he began to laugh so hard he almost fell over. This did not escape the notice of the priest. The priest was not acquainted with the saint and urged the crowd to attack and silence the blasphemer. It quickly became clear that the saint was not the only one confused about blasphemy. The villagers looked at each other for a moment and started to wander away. This caused the saint to wonder. Perhaps they were not nearly so stupid as he had always imagined them. He made a note to discuss this with the librarian. Now, the last of these poems that I'll read is When the Saint Was Dying. In one of their conversations, the saint of unbelievers argued to the librarian that Socrates was an actor who turned his death into a performance, complete with an audience of his students. The saint preferred Aristotle, who without applause left Athens to prevent a similar drama. When the saint himself was dying, he told no one, but news spread quickly anyway. Villagers whispered to each other and then to the inhabitants of nearby towns. By the time the librarian heard, the saint was no longer able to leave his makeshift bed. Villagers brought him food that he was largely unable to eat. The new priest came to visit as well. He was unacquainted with the saint and only heard that shopkeepers were frightened of his outbursts. Even though he was unable to get up, the saint still summoned the strength to insult the priest and send him away shocked that a dying man could curse so vividly. The same day, the librarian crossed the mountain and arrived in the afternoon. He boiled water over a small fire, portioned out some tea leaves, and held a cup up to the saint's lips. The saint was pleased that the librarian didn't feel the need to speak. If they'd spoken, the saint might have had to reassure the librarian that he didn't fear what was happening to him, but they did not speak. They only drank tea and stared at the fire. Although the librarian had never visited the saint before, the cabin was much as he'd pictured it. A broom stood propped up against the wall, and drafts from the roof and door pulled the fire one way, then another. In the corner, there was a rusted lantern, but no oil. The librarian made himself dinner from some bread and cheese he'd brought in his bag. He broke off a piece of the bread and tried unsuccessfully to get the saint to eat. He also covered the saint with the closest thing to a blanket he could find. a stiff animal skin, something the saint had probably found on a walk. The odor of the saint's sickness was suspended in the air like smoke. The next morning, when he saw the saint was no longer breathing, the librarian did exactly what the dead man would have done in his place. He closed the door of the cabin and walked home. Thank you.
Thank you so much, George. Very exciting to hear this work. We might call them narrative poems. We might call them prose poems. If you have the book, you might understand why I've dubbed them the Franklin stanza. Very interesting to work with and lay out, but we had a good time.
I apologize, Haley. I apologize.
So thanks so much, George. Wonderful reading.
Thank you.
Next up, we are moving into our invited mic portion of the evening with readers from Sheila-Na-Gig Volume 8.4. That is our summer 2024 issue. And we are starting off with Simona Carini, whose full collection also appears from Sheila-Na-Gig Editions called Survival Time. Welcome, Simona.
Thank you. Well, okay, this is probably the hardest act for me to follow right after George, right? Okay, so so I'm reading the poem that was in the summer edition of Sheila-Na-Gig, and I have a two-line anecdote, and actually some of you know about this. When I tried to post this poem on Facebook, it was censored by Facebook repeatedly. And so, since there was something about, burning books in your poem, in your poems, George, I think there is a connection. But you'll decide for yourself whether the gremlins or the algorithms that Meta was right or not. It's called On the Redwood Skywalk, Sequoia Park, Eureka. 100 feet above the ground, the closest I'll ever climb towards the canopy. My gaze was drawn first to the base of redwoods and Sitka spruce, clusters of sword ferns, green fireworks lighting up the coffee-colored soil. I inhaled the winter cold air flavored by resinous evergreens. The suspension trail swayed gently. Through the open mesh decking, I saw the forest floor. The distance from it startled me. I gripped the handrail, then let go, giving in to floating between trees. A joyful oh escaped, echoed as in a church. Birds responded. The sway less gentle midway, I imagined becoming airborne, rising closer to the light above the treetops. I pressed on, and when I gained the platform, my hands reached for the redwood tree, a soft, fibrous bark, as for a raft. I wanted this feeling to last, of being suspended between earth and canopy, buoyed up, untied but not unmoored. A place of ease, too, where voices sound like distant murmurs, where for a while I drop all gravity. And my next poem was inspired also by a place in, I forgot to say I'm reading from the north coast of California. And the next poem is called Along the Shore of the Malil Dunes, January 2024, North Coast, California. This morning of a young year, high tide has left a narrow band of sand. I walk immersed in air cleansed by rain and hail. My breathing uneven as when jolted awake, drifted tossed onto this beach by a breaker. No leaves, branches, or bark, just naked trunks and stumps of spruce, redwood, and fir that journeyed from far away. My thoughts scurry like the sanderlings, their black legs a blur as they wave chase and probe the sand for mole crabs. I walk along the dunes, watching waves wash ashore, their soothing splash a salt-infused chant. My breathing resonates with the motion of breeze, birds, and ocean, a landscape inviting me to exhale, untie, unpanic. When worry rises, swallowing gets hard, the breath ragged. This will be a place to return to, this liminal space between waves of sand and water, to embrace everything, expect nothing. Thank you so much.
I guess I'm up. Robert Dean, I'm coming to you from the plains of Kansas, where we are toasting these days. And the first poem I'm going to read is from the recent issue of Sheila-Na-Gig, and it's titled Bone. It's always tough to read in the same reading with George. It just, but I mean, that's why we do this, right? It's for challenges, to be challenged. So anyway, bone. Beneath the skin, that's where we live, kicking and screaming. Snap, and we are surprised. Our sharp ends erupt, shred raw meat. We eat it up. We are wolves, ravenous. We shake the broken body, spatter blood across the fragile things. Those lilies we planted early on, white like purity, like bone, like fools in love. And now we harvest, crack open the crop, tongue the sweet marrow, oh, so sweetly. Then I'm going to read a poem for my second poem that George actually mentioned that just came out today in Taiwan Masticadoris, although it's previously published in McQueen's Quintily, I think, a year ago. And I'm reading it because of what George read. So it's titled This Floating Life. No resemblance to this sporting life or a movable feast. Neither Hemingway nor Rugby make an appearance here. More like Shen Fu's record of domestic life, his frowned upon devotion to his not quite beautiful wife, Chen Yun, even Li Po's questioning of how much joy is possible. We speak here of the dream, dancing, prancing, glowing pathfinder stars on a clear night, the quixotic journey that begins with our first breath, ends with our last, a cast of characters stepping in and out, some staying only for tea, some for the long haul, some sharing the hearth of our heart, some casting shadows across the threshold of terror. Are we, in fact, allotted unlimited happiness or only a few grains of rice? Can we discern beauty in a Quasimodo, ugliness in a field of tulips? Is love a learned emotion? To be loved a birthright? Is it possible, like the Taoists of old, to refrain from naming this good, that bad? When I am 10 and the swim instructor says back float, my legs quickly sink, twin anchors pulling the rest of me under with them. Hemingway broods over both barrels of his favorite shotgun, pulls the trigger. Richard Harris's rugby player punches a spider on the wall when the woman he should love but probably doesn't dies. But then perhaps this is not so very different after all from the gentle Chen Yun's early death after her rejection by Shen Fu's parents. Not so very different from Li Po's description that this declaration that this floating life is like a dream. And why not Hemingway and Rugby? By the end of the summer, my feet no longer sink, having learned to trust the water to carry my weight. Fear of fear is the worst kind of fear. We were born, we swim, and somewhere along the way, if we're not keeping track of laps, not afraid of the journey, the medium, the Scylla and Charybdis of sorrows, we drift in pools of joy, as much of it as is needed, and perhaps a drop or two more. And I stole the title from Charles Wright's Sinology. Thank you.
Okay, I suppose it's my turn. I come to you from Lima, Peru. I'm a German-British Peruvian. It's a bit of a mess. I'm reading my summer edition Sheila-Na-Gig poem, as Haley suggested, and I had to find one that matches it. And then I found that both poems actually are witnesses to the less nice part of me. Let's put it this way. spurned. She put her unspent love into a cardboard box, added a few choice curses, and shut the lid firmly. He hadn't even seen her when he nearly bumped into her on his breathless trajectory towards the long-haired, blonde, long-legged, tanned, slim-waisted, soft-lipped fake Barbie. May her bed become infested with bedbugs. May her legs and armpits grow untamable, shaggy undergrowths. May her hair fall out in clumps, her teeth rot to black stumps, her lips reduced to 2 thin slices. Better still, may her face fall off. May her children be fat, stupid, snotty, and may his penis hurt when they make love. She then dropped the cardboard box into the flames of the fireplace, fearing she may open it one day and forgive. And the next one is in the same vein. While I prepare lunch, my lover sulks. He's been clouding over for a couple of days now. If only this storm were breaking. I'm 45 and fed up. While I'm cubing the onions, he opens another beer. I wipe my nose and cheeks with the back of my hand, more weeping. Attacking the tomatoes, I'm beginning to feel in control. I stick my sharpest knife into the belly of the mackerel and slice through muscle and skin. My face is distorted in the bowl of crimson water. My hand slides into that silver body, empties it of all life. When I feel his breath in my neck, I turn. Knife in my bloody hands, I'm ready to excise the boil.
Hello, everyone. I'm Marie Minney. I am reading from Talmadge, Ohio, which is located in Northeast Ohio near Akron. And my poem in the summer edition is called Sappho Sunrise. Seamstress of whimsy and desire, in a short, diaphanous dress. Duskiness gathers between tumultuous breasts, caressed by my beloved in a bed of ferns, rapturous smile radiant in the heat of dawning. For my second poem, since the Akron Pride Festival is next Saturday, I thought I would read a poem from A Woman in Progress, which was also published in I Thought I Heard a Cardinal Sing. And A Woman in Progress was recently awarded the 2024 American Fiction Award for Poetry Chapbook. This poem is called Rainbow on the Bathroom Rug, Akron Pride. I've lived a whole lifetime as someone I wasn't, wandering through gender-sensitive backcountry, from the hills and hollers of West Virginia, the grasslands and cornfields of Ohio, through Stonewall and Pulse, making it to Akron like my Appalachian kinsfolk during the great exodus north on the Hillbilly Highway, looking for a better life in the rubber factories of Goodyear, Goodrich, Firestone. I was searching for something too, not knowing what it was. The rainbow appeared suddenly, the afternoon sun's reflection on the bathroom rug, a sign that I had chased the rainbow logic, revealing myself on the other side, more treasured than any pot of leprechaun gold. Coming together for one day, celebrating our diversity, letting the world know we have survived another year. We are still here. We are not going away. A chance to rejoice in my own uniqueness. A chance to cry. A sacred experience like a dream sequence, fading in a misty haze. The crowd cheering for the choices I have made. I may have wandered through a lifetime as someone I wasn't. Now, in whatever time I have left on this earth, I'm home. Thank you so very much.
Hi, everyone. I think I'm next. I'm Kenton Yi. I grew up in the San Francisco Bay Area, but for a while I lived in Manhattan before coming back here. And this poem in the summer edition of Sheila-Na-Gig, Blue Whale, is told from the point of view of me when I was visiting a friend in the Tenderloin Union Square area of San Francisco. Blue Whale. Remember how I wanted to sleep alone once a month? Now that I'm alone, sleeping alone isn't the same. If solitude is the whale that swallowed me, I'm seeing through Jonah's eyes too many times. Ramen in winter, Manhattan in lights. You left me with the kind of books everyone donates. Few memories are worth saving nowadays. You laughed, I cried, you laughed, I laughed to be polite. Remember California, the part of San Francisco visitors don't see in rom-coms. I was late because I was in the Jack-in-the-Box making a wish and watching you send two men away empty-handed. The neon signs were on and off that night. You look preternatural, an outsized whale spout. Chicken on the bone, grease on the shirt, a cable car climbing Nob Hill. And us, walking under a sagging fire escape full of pigeons on Turk, a block from the dive that cooks with microwaves. Inside, we watched flies lay eggs on salami slices we didn't touch. We didn't eat, and I still tipped. Hungry, together, no joy but lights. The second poem is a work in progress that I've been playing around with. It's a response to Wallace Stevens's famous poem, Snowman. And it's so new that I'm not really ready to put a title on it, so I'll just read it. One doesn't need the mind of a knot to not see the lights and colors of stars and droplets on the city night, to live blind to leaves and skylines, to overlook the shadows and pox of Earth's only moon, reflecting the January sun, or have an ant's ears to the melodies of the cricket rubbing its wings into the wind. That is the performance of a ghost devoid of naughtiness, of the unconscious conscious, and to be so unconscientious as to not nod to the newt that may and the not that might not be. Thank you.
So we're going to start off here. This is a cluster of haiku. This is in the Sheila-Na-Gig summer issue called Ocean Haiku. Twinned moon, the eyes of a ghost crab emerge from the sand. An ellipsis shatters and falls into the sea. Pelican squadron. Lightning whelk. Sunset coloring altostratus clouds. At last, she lets me in. Chambered nautilus. Virga disappearing before the horizon. A seagull. So these were those 5 haiku written on a trip to Oak Island, North Carolina, where I wrote about 100 haiku in 2 weeks. So I was very productive. The next poem I want to read is called Cardinal. This was originally published in the journal Whiptail, the journal of the single line poem, but this is a triolet. I wrote it as a monoku triolet. So each of these lines is meant to read as a standalone one-line haiku, but they're stitched together into a triolet. Cardinal. Black, now white pines against sunrise. Landing on a lamppost in the wind, a crow. Blossoming moon, just leave it where it lies. White, now black pines against moonrise. A burst of red, space unties. Katabatic winds, breath from a shadow. Black, now white ash against starless skies. Falling on a stump in the wind, last snow.
Thanks very much, Mike, who goes by Joshua when writing. Happy to have you here. And thank you to all our invited Mike readers, reading from Sheila-Na-Gig's Summer 2024 issue, and to our fabulous featured reader, George Franklin, coming from Miami, Florida, reading What the Angels Saw, What the Saint Refused, the chapbook available from Sheila-Na-Gig Editions. I hope you all come check us out at www.sheila-nagigblog.com. Thank you, everyone, for being here.